Hey, we're on the other side of Thanksgiving now. Week 13 of the fantasy football season is here. Who can we trust or not from the wide receiver position? Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's having a great week out there. Here we are, week 13, talking wide receivers and trying to see who can we trust and who can we not this week. There's some difficult matchups. I'm just glad last week is over, to be completely honest. I think I may have set a record last week for the most hate mail ever received on Thanksgiving. My phone was just blowing up Thursday night after Amari Cooper's explosion. Apparently, everybody's hindsight after the game was over and after he went off all knew that he was going to do that, right? But as you can see, I have no crystal ball here, so I can't see the future. I just have to base it off of stats, numbers, the eye test for a lot of this stuff. I mean, let's be realistic. If anybody expected that from Amari Cooper, you're probably really lying. It's okay, though. I'll keep your secret. It's all right. But let's move on here to Week 13. Try to help you guys get those lineups set. Like usual, we're going to break down each matchup, talk about wide receivers for every single game, trying to make sure I touch somebody that's on all of your guys' rosters out there. It's a critical week, Week 13, right before the fantasy playoffs. We need to make sure we don't make any mistakes this week. Looking for a bounce-back week, so here we go. Let's talk some wide receivers. Thursday Night Football, Saints at Cowboys. For the Saints, you got Michael Thomas, who was a disappointment last week, right? Everybody scored touchdowns except for the people who were supposed to in New Orleans, Michael Thomas included. Only ended up with 7 fantasy points last week, 4 catches, 38 yards. His worst game of the year by far. But we can't really bench Michael Thomas, right? I mean, he's the number 4 fantasy wide receiver in one of the best offenses in football. He's had 4 touchdowns in his last 4 weeks. He's super involved. It is a difficult matchup. I mean, Dallas is the number 2 ranked defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 28 points per game. Now all of a sudden, Drew Brees likes to use a lot of other weapons. Traquan Smith is still questionable. We need to monitor his practice reports to see if he actually plays this week or not. It's a difficult matchup, but as for the Saints offense, if you have Michael Thomas, he's somebody who's probably a must-start every single week for you, unless you're in like a 4-team league, and then you have the luxuries of swapping in and out. Traquan Smith, though, is a little bit too risky for me this week, coming off a foot injury against a difficult matchup with Drew Brees spreading the ball around more. I'm not overly high on Traquan this week, but Michael Thomas, obvious must-start. All right, well, I guess we're going to get this one out of the way here really quick. Let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys and Amari Cooper. Yeah, he had a huge game, and I wasn't lying in the opening when I said I received a ton of hate mail on Thursday night. Nothing like getting hate mail on Thanksgiving, so I appreciate that from everybody. But listen, am I just going to change my mind and flip-flop on a player week in and week out because somebody has a good game? No, I'm not. And I hope you guys can respect that. I'm not like some of the other channels out there who's going to love someone and then hate someone and then love someone and then hate someone just based off of their performances. It's a season. It's not 1 week. This isn't like a DFS play. This is a redraft play where you're counting on people for a year. Amari Cooper has not been consistent. That is a fact, and nobody can argue that. 2 weeks ago, I didn't see all these supporters coming at me when I had him as a sit, and he had 3 for 36. All of a sudden, everybody comes out of the woodworks after he has a huge game and wants me to crown the guy. That's not going to happen. Now, does he have a decent matchup this week? Yes, he's going up against the New Orleans Saints, who are the 32nd ranked defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 45 points a game. He will have a tough matchup with Marshawn Lattimore. It's a defense that's playing great in New Orleans as of late. Part of the reason that the wide receivers are doing so good against New Orleans is because New Orleans scores so quickly and they score so often. It gives their opponents extra opportunities throughout the game, and they're going to have to throw. Dallas is not going to be able to run all game long against the New Orleans Saints and expect to win. They're going to have to throw. Amari Cooper is going to be their best option. Now, am I a surefire he's a must-start this week? No, because those inconsistencies are still there. As a flex play with somebody with upside, I don't have an issue with it, but there's always that chance for that 3 for 36 to pop back up, because I don't care how he's done since he's been with the Cowboys, he's still inconsistent. Last week was an anomaly. That's not the norm for Amari Cooper. So is there worse options? Yeah, there are. Am I going to change my hashtag of never Amari and calling him Amari Pooper? No, I'm not. I'm keeping it. He's got to earn my respect to change that. He's going to have to do this for multiple weeks before I change that. One huge game, it's not going to change my mind yet, but he's not a bad play as a flex option, in my opinion, here for Week 13. On a Sunday, we have the Baltimore Ravens and the Atlanta Falcons. For the Ravens, I'm really not too high on any of these wide receivers. And it's not all Lamar Jackson's fault. The problem is there's not one dedicated guy that's going to get the volume. We kind of thought it was going to be Willie Snead. He'd been the most consistent throughout the entire season. And then he went out and had nothing last week, like zero. No catches, no yards, he had nothing. Wasn't involved. John Brown, he ended with 1 catch for 25. Crabtree, 3 for 21, but did get the touchdown. I already mentioned Willie Snead. There's nobody, the tight end, Mark Andrews, had the big play of the game. With Lamar Jackson under center, none of these guys have a huge ceiling. They're going to be touchdown dependent, and there's not one that he's really going to lock onto. They need to control the ball on the ground in Baltimore on a weekly basis. Between defense and the run game, that's how they're going to win in Baltimore, not through the passing game. And because of that, I just can't trust anybody at the wide receiver position in Baltimore, not only this week, but probably for the remainder of the season. For the Falcons, we have Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Mohamed Sanu, all of who are basically good options every single week. Julio, he's a must start every single week. Still not surprised if we don't see him find the end zone again this week. Calvin Ridley, somebody who's been inconsistent at times, but has been a pleasant surprise. Also, last week, 8 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown against the New Orleans Saints. Mohamed Sanu, averaging right around 10 fantasy points a game so far this year. Another 4 catches for 74. Solid play. Now this week, it is a tough matchup. The 3rd-ranked defense against opposing wide receivers and the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens, though, they're not invincible through the air. They're a solid defense. But so is the Saints that we saw last week with them, and they were still able to produce some decent numbers. Julio's a must-start every single week. Ridley and Sanu, more as solid flex plays, not really wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 solid numbers, but they're decent flex plays. Sanu is a little bit safer, but if you want to gamble on the higher upside, Ridley is the play there. However, in this offense where they can't seem to get a run game going, all 3 of these guys should be heavily involved on a weekly basis. Panthers and Bucks are next, and for the Panthers, we'll talk about DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. Really don't know about #NeverFunchus yet. In my opinion, I hope he sits out because that makes DJ Moore more relevant, who's one of my starts of the week this week. Somebody who really kind of burned us in some easier matchups weeks 9 and 10. But the last 2 weeks against Detroit and Seattle, he has a combined 15 catches and just over 250 yards. Just under 250 yards and a touchdown. He's definitely somebody who is involved in this offense. And if Devin Funchess sits, DJ Moore almost becomes a fringe must start just due to the volume that he sees. And it's a great matchup. He gets the 29th ranked defense of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, giving up on average 39 points a game to opposing wide receivers. They've given up at least one receiving touchdown to opposing wide receivers every single game this year. Definitely a great play for DJ Moore. Curtis Samuel, he's really not going to get the volume. However, he's getting the touchdowns right now. 3 out of his last 4 games, he's had a touchdown, giving him double digits in all those games. As far as fantasy points and PPR leagues go, he's an okay play. More of a deep league, maybe 12, 14 teams or larger. Flex play, not really a PPR option because he doesn't see the volume. Really home run dependent, but he does have upside. We have lots of options for the Tampa Bay Bucks. Mike Evans being the number 1 option, who is now with Jameis Winston back under center, an automatic must start every single week. Another decent week last week for Mike Evans. 6 catches, 116 yards, no touchdowns. That's now his 2nd straight week with over 100 yards. Definitely somebody who needs to be in the starting lineup this week. Deshaun Jackson dealing with injuries, been inconsistent as of late. Only 3 for 19 last week. Not somebody who I'm really interested in starting in a critical week like this is. Adam Humphries is really the only other wide receiver that I trust in this offense right now. He's somebody who's involved on a weekly basis. He has 4 touchdowns in his last 4 games. Coming off this past week against San Francisco, 6 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown. A very safe floor for Adam Humphries. Somebody who I really don't mind having in there as a solid flex play every single week just because of his involvement in this offense. And he's somebody that Jameis Winston, he looks for on a regular occurrence. Adam Humphries is a great play. Chris Godwin, more of kind of a boom or bust, really touchdown dependent, had 4 catches for 42. We know they're going to throw the ball a lot in Tampa Bay, which helps these guys out. But really, right now, the only 2 guys that I would trust starting this week in Week 13 would be either Adam Humphries or Mike Evans. Bears and Giants are next. For the Bears, we'll have Allen Robinson, Taylor Gabriel, and Anthony Miller. And these guys are still kind of a question mark. We need to pay attention to the practice reports and injury reports of Mitch Trubisky. Does he come back this week? Because if he does, the upsides of these players will go up also. Allen Robinson, haven't really been on this bandwagon a whole lot this year. Really boom or bust, really touchdown dependent. A lot of people were excited for his Week 10 performance, 133 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's not the normal with Allen Robinson. He's just not that involved in this offense, more big play dependent. It's a tough matchup here going up against the 8th-ranked defense of the New York Giants, giving up on average 30 points per game to opposing wide receivers, however, have only allowed 2 receiving touchdowns in the past 4 games, both of which came in a Week 11 matchup against Tampa Bay. So they're a solid secondary there in New York. Allen Robinson, in my opinion, is more of a deep league play at this point. 12-team leagues and larger, maybe. I really don't trust him on a weekly basis. Taylor Gabriel, another guy who's been inconsistent. However, he's had 7 catches in each of his last 2 games, giving him double digits in both of those games. Not somebody who's going to really put up the big numbers on a consistent basis, but he is involved. If you're looking for a deep flex play, not a bad option for Taylor Gabriel. Anthony Miller is probably the one that I like the most. However, he came out last week against Detroit, 3 catches for 41 yards. Didn't do a whole lot. If I had to choose one to start this week, it's Anthony Miller against the New York Giants. He has the upside. He has the touchdown upside, which kind of edges him above both Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel, in my opinion. All right, for the Giants, we have Odell Beckham and Sterling Shepard. Shepard's going to be one of my sits of the week, and for really the only reason, because of that offense in New York, it's literally Odell Beckham, Saquon Barkley, and that's it. They really don't look anywhere else. I expected more from Shepard, especially since Ingram really hasn't been a factor this year. They just haven't really looked Shepard's way. It's literally give it to Odell or Barkley, whether they're open or not, and everybody else kind of just gets the scraps. In a game last week against one of the worst secondaries in football that's just absolutely depleted by injuries, the New York Giants decided not to go downfield and attack that secondary. Sterling Shepard had 4 catches for 37 yards. The week before that, against one of the worst defenses against opposing wide receivers, the Tampa Bay Bucks, 2 catches for 22. They're just not opening up the playbook and allowing Eli and this offense to move down the field in big chunks. That really limits the upside of players like Sterling Shepard. Odell Beckham's still going to be a must start every single week. Shepard, though, for me, I can't trust these inconsistencies and lack of production over these past 3 or 4 games. I'm not risking it with him here in Week 13. Bills and Dolphins are next, and for the Bills, do we really want to talk about anybody? I mean, we can talk about Robert Foster, but realistically, everybody outside of Buffalo has no idea who Robert Foster even is. Sounds like the dude that's about to do my taxes next year. I mean, he's had 2 decent games, only 5 catches over his last 2 games, but he's made them count. 3 catches back in Week 10 before their bye for 105 yards, and then last week, 2 catches for 94 and a touchdown. Do I really want to depend on that in a must-win game in Week 13? Not really. I really don't trust Kelvin Benjamin or Zay Jones anymore. Josh Allen is decent because he has the upside with his legs. I'm not trusting these guys from Buffalo in a must-win game. Sorry. Things aren't much better on the other side of the football, though, with the Miami Dolphins. We saw the return of Ryan Tannehill, and he did nothing. Danny Amendola, he finished the game with 1 catch for 13 yards. Devontae Parker, a.k.a. Bigfoot, 3 catches for 10 yards. Kenny Stills, 1 catch for 6 yards. Leonte Carew had the biggest day. He had 1 catch, but made it count for 74 yards and a touchdown. None of these guys are worth trusting, in my opinion, here in Week 13. No way, no thank you, not going to happen. Colts and Jags are next, and for the Colts, we got T.Y. Hilton, and I'll throw in Dontrell Inman, but if you're not in a deeper league looking for a flex play, he's really not a viable start, in my opinion. T.Y. Hilton is interesting, though. Yes, he gets the number 3 ranked defense of the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, as of late, it's looked a little bit easier to throw on Jacksonville than to run on Jacksonville. And what do they do really well in Indianapolis? Andrew Luck throws the ball really, really well, and T.Y. Hilton has been killing it as of late. 2 straight games, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns in those 2 games combined. He's had a total in PPR leagues of 55 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks, catapulting him up to now wide receiver 20 after an inconsistent middle of the season there with injuries. Now, do we trust T.Y. Hilton against the Jacksonville Jaguars? He faced this same defense back in Week 10 and had 3 catches for 77 yards. Not horrible, not great. 10 PPR fantasy points. I mean, you could do worse, but do we trust him this week in a critical Week 13? I have to say yes. There's a special connection between T.Y. Hilton and Andrew Luck. Now, will his upside be somewhat limited? It's possible. But like I said, this Jacksonville defense has allowed receiving touchdowns 2 straight weeks, including Week 11, where they allowed 260 yards receiving to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Andrew Luck, he's now lost Jack Doyle, so I expect Eric Ebron and T.Y. Hilton to be the top targets in this offense. And with as much as they throw, that gives them the upside. And I'm still okay with T.Y. Hilton here in Week 13. All right, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, you have Dede Westbrook, Dante Moncrief, but now you also have Cody Kessler as their quarterback in a run-first offense that may be without Leonard Fournette. And there's a whole lot of hot garbage going on this week for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's a difficult matchup. The Colts don't get enough respect, but right now they're the 7th-ranked team against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average only 29 points a game. They have allowed at least 1 receiving touchdown for 4 straight weeks. But do we really trust Cody Kessler, Dede Westbrook, and Dante Moncrief? Not really. If you have no choice, Dede Westbrook may be somewhat safer. The higher upside and touchdown upside may go with Moncrief if you want to gamble. Personally, I'd rather pass on both these guys if I could here in Week 13. Browns and Texans are next. For the Browns, we have Jarvis Landry and Antonio Callaway. Jarvis Landry, who has deeply hurt my heart and made one of my sits of the week. I just don't understand what's going on with Jarvis Landry. My co-host on the Roto Revolution over on the RotoBaller channel pretty much summed it up in one statement. You guys remember the old game, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Kyle kind of referred to that. Where in the world is Jarvis Landry? An offense that looks much improved in Cleveland. Way improved. Baker Mayfield playing great football from the quarterback position. And Jarvis Landry is nowhere to be found. Actually, Antonio Callaway has been a little bit more consistent as of late. Antonio Callaway at least has that somewhat of a touchdown upside. Last week, 4 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown, giving him 16 fantasy points. Jarvis hasn't had 16 fantasy points in a game since Week 7. Last 2 games combined 5 catches for 52 yards. I don't know what's going on with Jarvis Landry. I didn't expect a whole lot of touchdowns, but I expected a lot more production as far as the receptions went. He's not getting it. He's too risky for me here in Week 13 in a difficult matchup against the 6th-ranked defense of the Houston Texans, giving up on average 29 points a game to opposing wide receivers. They've only allowed 1 receiving touchdown to an opposing wide receiver since Week 6, and that was this past week against Corey Davis. Too tough of a matchup, not involved in the offense. Jarvis Landry worries me here for Week 13. All right, for the Texans, we have DeAndre Hopkins, automatic must start every single week. Not going to talk about him. Keke QT, he's not 100% healthy from this hamstring injury. You can kind of tell with watching some of the routes he ran last night. He's just not 100%, and his production is paying the price for it. Demaryius Thomas, I would personally like to thank. Hopefully he sees this video. I recommended him as a start of the week 2 weeks ago against the Washington Redskins, and he went out there and had 1 target for no catches, a whole lot of nothing. This past week, against an improved Tennessee defense, what does he do? Of course, he scores 2 touchdowns, has 19 fantasy points. Much love, Demaryius Thomas. I guess I was just a week early. But now this week, it's a decent matchup. 24th ranked defense of the Cleveland Browns. They've given up 3 receiving touchdowns in their last 2 games, including 2 this past week against Cincinnati. It's definitely not a bad matchup. Like I said, DeAndre Hopkins is the must start. Keke not being 100% worries me and would really make me hesitant to start him here in Week 13. Demaryius Thomas, I mean, it's like a crapshoot. I think he should have a good game. All things are pointing to him being involved and having a decent matchup in a decent game, but that happened 2 weeks ago, and I got a whole lot of nothing. If you're willing to take the risk, he has the upside. Maybe not the volume, but he has touchdown upside, especially in the red zone. More of a flex play at best in deeper leagues. Outside of that, though, DeAndre Hopkins is really the only one that I can solidly trust on a weekly basis. Broncos and Bengals are next. For the Broncos, Emmanuel Sanders and Courtland Sutton. Now, Emmanuel Sanders is going to be one of my starts of the week. A lot of people were starting to get worried about Emmanuel Sanders because from weeks 8 through 11, he kind of started to regress a little bit compared to what he did to start the season. Comes out this past week against Pittsburgh, 7 catches, 86 yards and a touchdown, 21 fantasy points. He's still the number 12 fantasy wide receiver even though he had a stretch of 3 games there that really started to worry people. It's a decent matchup. The 22nd ranked defense of the Cincinnati Bengals, if you even want to call it defense. This defense, quotation fingers, as of late, hasn't been able to stop anything. It's definitely a great matchup for Emmanuel Sanders. All things pointing towards him having a great game. The Cincinnati Bengals giving up on average 37 points per game to opposing wide receivers. And Courtland Sutton is talented, but he's just not involved. I mean, 1 catch for 14 yards last week. Do we want to then turn around and trust him here in week 13? Not really. He only has 4 catches in his last 2 games combined. Still hasn't had a game over 100 yards. Only 2 touchdowns on the season. Too risky for me here in week 13. Emmanuel Sanders is the guy I want in my lineup. For the Bengals, we may have A.J. Green. More than likely, probably not. Tyler Boyd and John Ross. Now, A.J. Green is still questionable. It would not surprise me if they just shut him down rest of season. They have nothing to play for. Jeff Driscoll is now their quarterback. To me, it would not surprise me if they just put A.J. Green on IR for rest of season, but we'll have to wait and see about that. Tyler Boyd, somebody who takes a huge hit in value now that Andy Dalton is no longer there. He's still serviceable, but more instead of a wide receiver 2, he's now leaning a little bit more towards that flex option. John Ross, really touchdown dependent. There's a chance, small chance, that he sees an upgrade in value here with Jeff Driscoll, maybe more short, quick passes, and John Ross can utilize that speed. But really, touchdown dependent at this point. He does have touchdowns 3 straight weeks, though, so that's something we can't ignore. Definitely an option in deeper leagues, flex play only, great DFS type of start. It's a decent matchup. The 19th ranked defense of the Denver Broncos giving up on average 36 points per game. They've given up at least 1 receiving touchdowns every single game since week 6. So it's a defense you can throw on. It's a decent matchup. It's just the quarterback play of Jeff Driscoll is really going to start limiting some upside. I can see maybe a little bit more Joe Mixon, short passing game, not so much of those big home run plays that we've seen here throughout the season. Rams and Lions are next, and for the Rams, you basically start Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods every single week going forward. But what about Josh Reynolds? Just because he assumes the Cooper Kupp role doesn't mean he assumes the Cooper Kupp production. There will be a difference there. He won't see that same amount of volume that Kupp was seeing. However, he still has value. It's more like flex value in larger, 12-team teams or larger, 12-team leagues or larger, but he still does have value. He has touchdown upside. He's just not going to see the volume that maybe a Cooper Kupp would. Outside of that flex play, though, Brandon Cooks, I really see Robert Woods being the number 1 receiving option in this offense. Cooks may be the more big play guy, but as far as volume goes, Robert Woods is the man going forward here for the Rams. All right, for the Lions, you have Kenny Galladay, who will be a must-start going forward, especially now that Marvin Jones has been moved to the IR. Is there anybody else there we can really trust? Bruce Ellington, maybe, just based off of volume. He's going to have to be a PPR league because he's just not getting the production. Had 6 catches for his 2nd straight game this past week. Only got 28 yards on those 6 catches, though. So really, really volume dependent. Not really a guy that I would like to count on here in possibly a must-win game in Week 13. He has upside in PPR leagues, but to me, it's just too risky. I'm sticking with Kenny Galladay, somebody who should see a ridiculous amount of targets going forward in a decent matchup against the Rams where they're going to have to throw all 4 quarters to stay in this ballgame. The Rams are a defense you can throw against. We've seen that all season long. They're not a shutdown secondary. Kenny Galladay should have a decent game, but outside of him, I really don't trust anybody else. Cardinals and Packers are next, and for the Cardinals, we got Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. I guess really the only thing Larry does now is catch touchdowns. He's got 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, however, only has 4 receptions, making him a solid play. I guess you could say he's got a safe floor. He does have 5 straight weeks in double digits, but are you overly thrilled to have a high upside game? Not really. It's a decent matchup against the Green Bay secondary, giving up on average 38 points per game to opposing wide receivers, giving up 3 touchdowns in their last 2 weeks. But it's just that offense in Arizona. It's not so much Larry. He's just not getting the volume to get you those big days. He does have a safe floor. He is somebody who's going to be looked at a lot inside the red zone. We've already seen this touchdown upside. He now has 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games, which is definitely a bonus. He's a safe play. It's Larry Fitzgerald. If you have him, you probably haven't been overly reliant on him all season long. He's a solid flex play for me here in Week 13, just based off of his touchdown upside alone and the possibility that at any given time, he can go out there and get you 7 to 10 catches, and it's not even that big of a shock if he does. All right, for the Packers, you have Davante Adams, who's a weekly must start. Doesn't matter about the matchup, who he's playing, where they're playing, doesn't matter. You start Davante Adams. The other two guys, the guys with the ridiculously long names, Equanimeous St. Brown and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. At this point, I think we're at the point where MVS is borderline droppable. I said this over on the RotoBaller channel earlier in the week. It's kind of like MVS picked up the playbook the quickest out of these two rookies, and he really benefited from it here earlier in the season. Well, now that Equanimeous St. Brown has started to inch forward in this offense, he's looking to be the better option, the better receiver, the more talented receiver between the two of them. Somebody who was passed over in the draft, still has a lot of upside. Equanimeous St. Brown didn't have a huge game, only 3 catches but 53 yards. A lot of people are asking about Jake Kumerow. He hasn't even been activated off the IR yet, and when he does, he's not going to become an automatic must start. The guy's going to need some time to get back in there. It's not like he's got this huge pedigree of being a stud wide receiver, even though he had a great preseason. In my opinion, the only one that I'm trusting from the Packers offense this week is going to be Davante Adams. Everybody else is just too much hit or miss. Chiefs and Raiders are next, and we usually want every piece of that Chiefs offense that we can get in our lineups. Sammy Watkins, not 100% healthy, still dealing with some of that foot soreness that he's dealt with here for the past few weeks. If he continues to be limited with that, he's not somebody who I'm overly excited to throw in my lineup. It kind of worries me a little bit that he could always go out there, re-aggravate it, not be able to finish. Tyreek Hill is an automatic must start no matter what. He's a definite pillar of your lineup. Now, if something happens where Sammy Watkins isn't going to play or is limited, Chris Conley gets a bump in value. The game before their bye week against the Rams, that amazing Monday Night Football game, 7 catches, 74 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Huge part of the offense once Sammy wasn't there and able to produce. Conley gets a huge bump in value if something does happen to Sammy Watkins where he does not play this week. So keep an eye on that. Tyreek Hill must start. If Sammy sits, Chris Conley is a sneaky flex play here for Week 13. All right, for the Raiders, I could sit here and mention the names of Seth Roberts and Jordy Nelson and Marcel Aitman, but really, nobody out there is really counting on them starting for them this season. Right now, the highest started player out of all those guys is still Jordy Nelson. Started in only 2.6% of leagues, and I have to think that those leagues have just given up all hope in life. You're not starting any of these guys Week 13. Jets and Titans are next, and for the Jets, it's a lot of question marks still. Jermaine Kearse had a decent game, 6 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown. That's way too many sixes for my liking. Quincy Enunwa, he pitched in with 4 catches for 73, not horrible. Robbie Anderson, 2 catches for 22. He's kind of been an afterthought on the season. Do we trust any of these guys this week? Maybe Quincy Enunwa is a safe-ish type of play, going up against a Tennessee defense, which is giving up on average 39 points to opposing wide receivers, including what we saw this past week, Demaryius Thomas with his 2 touchdowns. They've given up over 200 yards receiving to opposing wide receivers 2 out of their last 3 games. Definitely a team that in the past has been easier to throw on than run on. Apparently, Lamar Miller didn't care about that, but it's definitely a defense that you can throw on. Quincy Enunwa may be the safest bet, but this is deeper leagues only. I'm not overly sold on it, but maybe based off of volume, he may have the safest floor. Everybody else is really touchdown dependent going forward. Jermaine Kearse would be the next option that I would choose, but I'm really trying to shy away from anybody in this offense in a must-win game here in Week 13. All right, for the Titans, you really only have Corey Davis, who had himself a great week last week. 4 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown. That's now touchdowns 2 out of his last 3 weeks. He's actually scored over 20 fantasy points in PPR leagues 2 of his last 3 weeks. He's definitely somebody who has the ability. The upside has always been there for Corey Davis. It's usually just relied on Marcus Mariota getting him the football. This is a great matchup for him. The 28th ranked defense of the New York Jets, giving up on average almost 39 points per game. They've given up over 200 yards receiving to opposing wide receivers 2 straight games. It's a great matchup for Corey Davis, and that offense has the potential to move the ball this week. I'm not completely off the Corey Davis bandwagon here for Week 13, but due to the inconsistencies of that offense as a whole, I'd really like to limit it to a flex play at best. There's a lot of great wide receiving options out there this week. I don't know if Corey Davis deserves to be in that wide receiver 1-2 category, but as a flex with upside, I think he's got it this week in Week 13. Niners and Seahawks are next, and we need to kind of play the waiting game here for the Niners again. Is Pierre Garçon going to play? Is Marquise Goodwin going to come back from his personal time off? If not, it's really the Dante Pettis show. but we need to pay attention to the practice reports, the injury reports, and find out what's going on with these other receivers ahead of him. If Goodwin and Garcon come back, that really limits the upside of Dante Pettis. If they miss again, Dante Pettis is somebody who last week put up 4 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown, and now has a decent matchup against the 15th ranked defense of the Seattle Seahawks, giving up on average 35 points per game to opposing wide receivers. If there's no other receiving options really there outside of maybe Kendrick Bourne for the Giants, for the 49ers this week, it's definitely a solid option as a flex play for Dante Pettis. He'll get the volume. He'll get the targets. That's what you really need to score fantasy points, right, is the opportunities. He could get it. But we really need to pay attention to those practice reports and the injury reports. If Goodwin and Garcon play, Pettis is more of a deep league, flex play at best. All right, for the Seahawks, we have Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, and David Moore. Right now, the guy who I trust the most is Tyler Lockett. He's actually going to be one of my starts of the week this week. He's now had a touchdown in all but 3 games this year. What is that? 8 touchdowns out of 11 games. He's been their number 1 wide receiver. His best game of the year last week, 5 catches for 107 yards and a touchdown. It was his first week going over 100, but he's the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver in this offense. And now he gets the San Francisco 49ers secondary, giving up on average 35 points to opposing wide receivers, including last week against the Tampa Bay Bucks, where they gave up 231 yards receiving to their wide receivers. Great matchup. Tyler Lockett's one of my starts of the week. Doug Baldwin has been highly disappointing for a lot of you, and I get that. Last week, 5 catches for 39 yards. More of a deeper league flex play at best. David Moore had a huge week. Only 4 catches, but 103 yards and a touchdown, 20 fantasy points. He's definitely a boom or bust type player. If he gets that big play, that big touchdown play, you're going to be happy. The problem is if he doesn't get enough volume in order to suffice not getting that touchdown. In my opinion, too risky for Week 13 is David Moore, even though it's a decent matchup. The guy that I want in my lineup for Week 13 is Tyler Lockett. Vikings and Patriots are next, and for the Vikings, you got Thielen and Diggs. And I'm not going to sell you on starting them. If you have them, they're good plays this week. It's a solid defense in New England, but do you really bench the number 1 and number 11 fantasy wide receivers in PPR leagues? No, you really don't. Not right now, and not the way they're playing. They're both must-starts. All right, for New England, we have Julian Edelman and Josh Gordon. Julian Edelman, somebody who I had as a start of the week last week and played pretty well. Had 4 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown. Josh Gordon didn't have a huge day, did have 5 catches for 70 yards. Josh Gordon, I'm a little bit worried about going forward. They're starting to get healthier in New England. More options for targets. If Gronk is back, if James White can get involved, maybe Rex Burkhead's thrown in the mix. They still have Chris Hogan. There's a lot of options in New England for Tom Brady. Josh Gordon will still be productive. He just may not have that crazy high upside on a weekly basis. To me, Julian Edelman is a very safe play almost week in and week out. Josh Gordon, I'm a little bit worried about. They do have the 5th-ranked defense of the Minnesota Vikings, who looked great against the Green Bay Packers this past week, giving up only 9 receptions for 125 yards to their wide receivers. They haven't allowed a touchdown the past 2 weeks, which is a plus. They hadn't allowed one since week 4 before that. Definitely a solid defense in Minnesota. They have that ability to make a good offense look normal. That's a possibility this week. Julian Edelman's the safest play. Josh Gordon, more of a flex play at best. And cross your fingers, there's a chance that he struggles this game, whether Xavier Rhodes plays or not. I know he went down with a hamstring injury, something else we need to pay attention to. Josh Gordon, though, is just more of a flex play at best going forward, just due to the limited upside with all the other options in that offense. Chargers and Steelers are next. For the Chargers, you got Keenan Allen. Still a must start. He's all the way back up to wide receiver 14, so hopefully you didn't give up on him too early. Loved him all season long. He's definitely somebody who produces well down the stretch. Tyrell Williams got a big fat goose egg last week, and now we're maybe seeing the resurgence of Mike Williams. Maybe. Only had 4 catches, but did have 25 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's somebody who has the high touchdown upside, just doesn't see the volume. It's a difficult matchup this week against the Steelers. The 11th ranked defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 33 points a game. Only allowed 1 receiving touchdown to an opponent's wide receiver over the last 4 weeks, though. It's a solid D. You're going to start Keenan Allen. As far as the Williams guys, it's hit or miss, boom or bust. I wouldn't risk it in week 13. For the Steelers, you have Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, both ranked inside the top 10. Both must-starts every single week. I don't care about the matchups. You want them in your lineups. Monday Night Football, you have the Redskins and the Eagles. For the Redskins, this is something where you think you'd want to put a lot of their receiving options in there, right? I mean, the Eagles have wide receivers playing safeties right now. That's how banged up they are in Philadelphia. They need to attack the secondary. But do they really have anybody to attack with? The only two options I really see, Josh Doctson and Trey Quinn. Trey Quinn is more of the safer option, more of the PPR option. Not a crazy high ceiling, but a safe play. Averaging 10 points over his past 2 games. This past week against Dallas, 5 catches, 26 yards, and a touchdown, and celebrated with a touchdown dance of the Scarn from The Office. He gets bonus points for that. But Josh Doxson's more of the big play guy. 6 catches for 66 yards. Also too many sixes for my liking. But that is now three double-digit games out of his past 4. He has upside. He does have 2 touchdowns in his past 4 games. I like the matchup against Philadelphia. Like I said, they're giving up on average 41 points a game to opposing wide receivers. Definitely a team you can throw on with all those injuries. Trey Quinn, in my opinion, is the safest play as a flex play in deeper leagues. Josh Doctson, the same thing. Flex play really only big play dependent. It's a risk. It's a great matchup, but if you don't have any better options, I'm just crossing my fingers. I mean, they still have Colt McCoy under center. Kind of seems like Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis may be a little bit more involved in that game plan. Maybe more running with Adrian Peterson this week. They worry me. Like I said, I feel a little bit safer with Trey Quinn, but not by much. All right, for the Eagles, we have Alshon Jeffrey and Golden Tate that we'll talk about. Alshon Jeffrey, I had as a sit way back in week 6. In that week, he had 8 receptions for 74 yards and 2 touchdowns. So what's going to happen here in week 13 when I make him a sit again? Because I'm going to. The guy hasn't had more than 4 receptions in a game since week 7. Hasn't had a touchdown since week 7. Hasn't had more than 8 fantasy points since week 7. This is not an offense that is really clicking right now. They're trying to get the run game going on the ground with Josh Adams. He's getting over 20 touches a game. Golden Tate has really eaten into the targets of Alshon Jeffrey. Not that he's being overly productive with it. Last week, 4 catches for 30 yards. The highest he's had is 50 yards. That was back in week 8. I mean, there's not a whole lot going for this offense right now. It is a decent matchup. The 26th ranked defense of the Washington Redskins, who have given up 3 receiving touchdowns over their past 2 games, giving up on average close to 38 points a game. The problem, I just don't trust these guys this week. Golden Tate's going to see the volume. Zach Ertz is going to see the production. Nelson Aguilar, Alshon Jeffrey, they're kind of just fighting for the scraps, and it's too risky, in my opinion, in a must-win game for a lot of teams out there in Week 13. Too critical that I can't really go out there and trust Alshon Jeffrey this week. What if he goes out there in a must-win game and puts up another 3 for 39? You're going to be sorely disappointed. And look at it this way. Even if he balls out, all the fans of Philadelphia can come and thank me that the 2 times I had him as a sit all year long, he went absolutely crazy. It's like a win-win. We'll have to wait and see. Personally, though, Alshon Jeffrey is a sit for me. Golden Tate, deeper league, flex play only, and I'm not touching Nelson Aguilar in this offense right now. All right, those are all the wide receiver matchups here for Week 13. Hopefully that was able to help you set your lineups a little bit easier. Make sure you're using that comment section down below, trying to get as much help as we can. I'll answer as many of them as I possibly can get to. Really appreciate you guys' support, though. Look out for the live show Saturday afternoon, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We've been having fun with that for a few weeks. Love interacting with you guys. Really appreciate the support. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye.